Hey everyone, I did something really cool that I want to share with all of you, but before I do, I think it could use a little bit of context. So there are these short animations, you could watch them on YouTube, but that's not where they originated, called 30-second Bunnies Theatre. It's more or less what it sounds like, famous movies or film series reenacted by animated rabbits and told in 30 seconds, give or take. These shorts were created by a lady named Jennifer Shiman, and just the other day I had the incredible privilege of speaking with Miss Shiman on her history with art, creative process, things like that. Anyone who's a fan of these cartoons, or just of old internet animation in general, isn't going to want to miss this, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Jen Shiman.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hi.
You can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then let's make sure that my recording software can hear you just fine. Just try speaking a little bit.
I'll try speaking a little bit. How's that?
You you have
Testing,
you have in
3 2.
fact spoken a little bit and it can hear you quite nicely. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, good so far. Good so far. Alrighty then. So I think we can just get started right off the bat. Let me just make sure I have my questions on hand. That would be useful. Come on, get it together. This is very unprofessional. I guess I can probably just get started with the first question. Obviously, these were just sort of guidelines. We can jump off to other things, but let's start with the most obvious one. The thing that immediately popped out to me: why bunnies of all animals to have as the focus of these little animated short recaps that you did?
Well, there's nothing truly romantic about the bunny's choice. They were the product of a sketching session that I drew a bunch of different types of animals and settled on the bunnies just because I thought they might be able to do the job best of all.
I see. I see. What were some of the other animals that you drew?
I think there were probably frogs, maybe hamsters, other cute, fluffy creatures. I think I
And
tried pigs.
that would have been. I don't think I could have imagined that working as well. That doesn't really fit in with some of the other animals that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean pigs, and that's kind of so a lot bigger than like frogs or hamsters or bunnies or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't even know what I was going for. I mean, I don't think I had a definitive creature in mind. I suppose, like, technically, the simpler the better for the animation. Um, but definitely, my preference, for instance, is to draw animals versus like human beings.
yeah, you're more of an animal drawer than a human drawer. I feel like that's
Yes,
kind of common.
animals are my preference.
Yeah, yeah. Is it just cause you enjoy it more, or is it easier, or
Yes, all of the above.
all of the above? Okay. Yeah, because humans are hard to get right. From what I understand, I'm not the best artist, but I know that like the human form is difficult to replicate, even when you're trying to do it in like a cartoony style.
Yeah, I find that human form doesn't quite, yes, not only do I personally find humans hard to draw, but also hard to make them say what I want them to say, whatever that may be. I find it, I find animal bodies and animal figures, characters just feel, I have a more of a, they resonate more for me.
Okay. Um. Well, cool. I guess I can get away from that to something else. One thing that I'm curious in is, it's like we often hear about what the genesis was for anytime anyone is in like a creative or artistic field. you often hear about what the origin for that was. So what got you interested in animation and just sort of art in general?
I've been interested in making things and particularly animated things and drawn things since I was a little kid, probably like even before age 3, I remember drawing. But the urge to tell stories using animation and using it really came from growing up an only child. So I was really very self-entertaining, and I liked it that way. I was definitely like a high introvert. And so I just loved watching Saturday morning cartoons, animated cartoons, and grew up on a diet of Chuck Jones, Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Looney Tunes um, shows, as well as reading Peanuts comics, reading Moomin. The world of Moomin was really big for me, big influence. So like adventure storytelling, fantasy adventure, quest storytelling has always been the thing that I knew that I wanted to try to do too.
Moomin? I'm not sure I'm familiar.
Moomin World, there's a Finnish author named Tove Jansson who created the character Moomin Troll and Moomin Troll's Moomin family. And of the books that she's written about them, my favorite one is Comet in Moomin Land. But they've also been turned into an animated series, and also were a long time comic book series, I think in the daily Finnish papers, and then got syndicated.
I see. And that was, if I remember, is that something you read or is that something you watched or both?
I started reading the stories and then have seen the animation in my later life.
Okay. Okay. Um, and I guess like I guess if that's how it started, like in terms of just the actual creativity process for just like getting interested in animation and that kind of thing, what was the what happened on like the production side of things with the bunnies animations? Like how did you get started with those? Was that something that you were commissioned to do? Was that something you just did like once as a joke and then decided to do more? How did that whole thing get started?
Well, the Bunnies project, that idea, um, began when I was living in Los Angeles, working in Los Angeles for um, an electronic greetings company at that time. And I was really wanting to work on a project that I would own the rights to because everything that I made at the company I was at was all work for hire, which meant that they owned anything that I drew while I was working for them. And I've worked in a lot of different business model capacities. I've worked for small offices as a staff member. I've worked for larger companies in departments, but I've also worked as an independent contractor where I'm the entrepreneur and earn the money directly, where I also have to, be in charge of my own payments and overhead and that sort of thing. Um, so the thing about the independent contractor business model is that I do retain the rights automatically, like whereas working for a large company, often you will sign away the right to do that. Um, I wanted to make things that I would retain the rights to. And so at that point, I started thinking about what kind of project that might look like. And that is when I started working on the Bunnies stuff as a side project to hopefully um, sell or, get money, get income through, for instance, commissions or while retaining the rights to what I made. And so then I came up with um, a couple um, sample shorts, one of which being The Exorcist Bunnies, which was like the first one, and was ready to try to pitch those sort of like an online column in some sort of a larger entertainment group. And it was early 2000s, so it was like 2004. And it was a time when there was sort of a frontier of content sharing. And when I did share that file, the Exorcist Bunnies cartoon, it got a really large, one might call it viral response, whereby it got a lot of attention from people, and that drew the attention of businesses who came to me and were like, well, so once I got some attention from an audience, I started making some more in my spare time to try to, well, I was excited to get the feedback and that someone was watching my stuff. So I wanted to make more things for them to watch. At which point businesses started approaching me like, we could earn money from your stuff. Um, and that is when I began working on commission for Stars was my first client. And that led to a number of other clients who also commissioned money shorts. And now I've made over 95 over the course of, it was about 15 years, 95 animated shorts of bunnies reenacting movies in 30 seconds. I should have said that from the beginning, that is what it is. 30-second Bunnies Theater. Bunnies reenacting movies in 30 seconds or
Yeah.
more or less.
Uh, yeah, sometimes I was gonna say sometimes it's a little more.
Yes.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. 'Cause I'm glad that you mentioned like the time period that this was all in, because that was actually going to be one of my next questions. So if this was like early 2000s, 2004-ish, you said, that would
Yeah.
have been that would have been pre-YouTube. So
Right.
there was like less of a, well, there were plenty of places that you could share things like that, but I think that it wasn't quite to the same level that it not even is today. Not to the same level that it was like 10 years ago instead of 20, where you could like actually just like go to this one place and upload anything, and chances are at least one person will come across it and watch it, because I don't really, I YouTube started being a thing like right as I started being a thing. So I don't really have a whole lot of memory of like, I don't actually have any memory of what pre YouTube internet looked like, but it seemed like it was a lot harder to just like find places to submit your stuff and have people actually see them.
Yeah, it was, that's kind of the paradox throughout the sharing history of content. I mean, it feels like with regard to distribution and like the middleman position that some company like a YouTube or, for instance, in publishing, like the publishing house or, the agents, like there was a frontier for a while there. And so while it seemed like it was hard to find places to share your stuff, and it was, there were other things that didn't exist yet, like the algorithm, and so whereas technology now has like taken the place of the middleman, making it harder for creators to share their work with, a certain audience because of the glut of content, there's too much content, and how can you find anything, especially when it's being controlled by algorithms, it's being curated for you. But at that time, while there were less places per se, like there were more people in those positions of arbitrary, like that could control arbitrarily, like the distribution channels. So there was like a time there that there was a little window though, like there was a little opening where you could kind of get your stuff around the people and the algorithms didn't exist yet. And so that's kind of the little hole that I was able to get through at that point. Um, and who knows what that's going to look like again, as the paradigms like evolve again, they keep evolving. Like, where will those little niche spots open up? That'll be the interesting development to watch.
Yeah, because something like those, because something like the bunny shorts, those are they're very much like products of their time in the sense that, you just look at them and you kind of get a feel for something like that it's just like, okay, this is clearly old internet. This is like maybe pre-YouTube, but if not, it's definitely like very early days YouTube. Because I was just, it really kind of gels with that particular style of just sort of like fun, goofy things that I don't want to say that anybody could have made, but it's like it could have come from anywhere. And I think that was sort of the appeal of old internet, because now everything is much more businesslike. Everything it's more like just kind of what television turned into. But I mean, like,
Yeah.
stuff like YouTube and other video sharing platforms, they weren't really, I don't think, well, I wouldn't know, but they weren't, I don't think the idea was that they were created to emulate television. I think that it was more meant to be like an alternative. Because I mean, for a long time, I mean, it's like it's even hard. It's probably easier for you to imagine this, but it's hard for me to imagine that there really was a time where just like the thought of making something and actually having people, like other people outside of just your family, like your community or whatever, your immediate vicinity, actually watch it was just so far out of the realms of possibility for your average person that it just didn't even cross their mind. It just didn't ever occur to them because it was just something that wasn't really supposed to be.
I
And
think that is something that I really enjoyed about that time because it was a novelty in 2004 to hear from people globally about the work that I did. I got an email from the McMurdo station in Antarctica that they were watching my stuff. And I was like, what? Like, I've never, like, who could ever get contacted from Antarctica, about your work? Like, in a time, time's gone, the global reach of technology at that point was mind-blowing. That was not a thing that content creators had access to before that, was to be able to reach out with that kind of scope.
yeah, yeah. And do you feel like that novelty is kind of lost on people today? Like it's something that people don't really think about as much, or maybe they take a little more for granted.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it goes unnoticed. I mean, it's just a given that everything is global now. And I mean, that you can see the results, from everything from politics to, I mean, being able to broadcast atrocities, for instance. Like there's, like nothing stays unwatched, like everything is immediately visible globally. And that's new this, um, as of the aughts, whatnot.
Yeah. Aughts, 2020s, whatever decade we're in. Um, 21st century, I guess.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think the aughts is just the 2000s.
You're right. That's true.
Yeah, yeah. Or like some people say the noughties, like aughts, noughties. I don't really get the etymology of that myself, but it's whatever. It's not a big deal. It's just language. It's just slang. Um, Now, what did the production cycle for making one of the animations look like? Like, how long did it take? What were the steps? Like, how did that? What went into making one of those once you really kind of got the ball rolling on them?
I had a process, and generally it took about 6 weeks for me to make one short, except for one of the shorts, like the James Bond one, which involved watching all the movies and incorporating them all, or at least like 98% of them. That took longer, but generally, week one would be development and watching the film that I was going to edit or reenact with the bunnies. And then, so the first week was spent doing that. Second week, also um, working on the story, the retelling, and then would be the thumbnails and the pencils. I animated everything. Generally, I used a software at that time was called Flash. It used to be owned by Macromedia, then Adobe bought it, and they've retired it in the last 5 years. So that software turned into Adobe Animate, and it's part of their subscription-based Creative Suite today. Um, so I would use that software, Flash, to animate. And so I would bring in the elements, though, that I drew by hand and inked by hand. So there would be a week there for, drawing, penciling, inking, and then production would take up the rest of the time. I didn't really work with a formal script, so I would go back later and write up the script because sometimes stars wanted to, like they were licensing the shorts in other countries, and so they would need a script that they could use for translating. Um, and then the production, like I said, took about 2 weeks. And then there's quality control. And then I would give it to them and they would do whatever post-production needed to happen because they had all the big fancy editing suites or whatever they needed to. Because they were also producers of original television. So they had all that equipment in Colorado, which is where they were headquartered at that time.
I see. Wait, if they were headquartered in Colorado at the time, where were you?
Well, I was in Los Angeles, and so
Oh,
we were interfacing remotely.
yeah. I'll bet that the remote interface technology at the time probably left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
I guess. I mean, I guess it's once you kind of get it right, it's. I don't know. I'm just thinking about like the common stereotype of like how people kept complaining that stuff like Skype, when people used to use Skype, it would always like crash or lag or wouldn't behave properly.
Yeah, I mean, software behaving badly has been, you know, a perennial theme.
Yeah, it's not like that. It's not like that goes away. I mean, it's like not to get too off track, but if you want to talk about software behaving badly, like maybe 30 minutes before this interview started, I was having some trouble with my really like practically brand new computer. I was like having to update it and like install new drivers because my keyboard wasn't connecting properly. So it's technology is temperamental.
Yes, it's always ongoing. Tech support is always a thing.
Yeah, no, it's I mean it's I guess as long as this get well. Actually, do real people even do tech support anymore, or is that all just AI? Whatever. Well, actually, speaking of which, I mean, how much of the process for making the shorts, how much of that was technological, and if so, like, do you recall any notable like tech related errors that happened while you were trying to make one of these?
Well, the tech components of the process would be scanning the drawings. I used a scanner for that, flatbed scanner.
Hmm.
Um, and and then bringing the scanned drawings, the scanned artwork into the um, to convert the art and then bring it into Flash. And there were, like there were a lot of times that, a client would need something output as a QuickTime movie, but how were we going to um like what were the specifications? What were the dimensions? Was it high resolution enough? How does it look? Is it choppy? Are there any weird artifacts? When you composite everything, which means you're converting the um, the artwork into the final file format. Which, yeah, like it seemed like there was all sorts of, black magic involved to try to like make sure these random artifacts do not show up in your frames for whatever reason. So there, yeah, like those were the types of things that technology was just like, but obviously, to be able to do this from my desktop, like that in itself was a massive change from the way that I used to animate, which was I worked at an animation studio where they had this large scale equipment and I needed to barter my hours to be able to use their equipment to try to make a short film, which was my first short film about which was like with different characters at that time, but that was like 1995, 96. And that sucked. It sucked to not have the ability to work at my own desk and output something that could actually be viewable and professionally um, produced um, from my own machine. Like that was a big revelation.
Yeah, I think that's like the big thing that's lost on a lot of people making stuff nowadays is just the fact that it's like you can do it all from, and it's like you have to have the right tools and the right resources, but still it's a process that can mostly happen just from home. And I mean, like the ability to not have to go anywhere or do anything or like go out and ask someone else to do it for you is definitely that's a big leap forward in a lot of ways. Because I mean, it's like that's definitely not a it's not wasn't common not too long ago. Now anybody can make anything pretty much by themselves. But
Yeah.
yeah, wait. So you I need clarification. Did you draw all of the drawings, like all the frames and everything? Was that by hand or was that digitally?
Well, it was yes and no. It was all drawn by hand. It was animated. Sometimes it was animated in Flash, but sometimes I animated it with a light box, um, which I used to do my tracing. But the way that I did the animation was a lot more like collage than traditional peg bar animation, which I've also done. I started in a traditional animation studio doing things like production assistance and camera work and soundtrack reading of the old school stuff. So I have a knowledge of how studio production works. But to save time, I definitely took a lot of shortcuts. So it ended up being a blend.
Hmm. I noticed that in if you check the like credits of every single one, you did well. You weren't the only one doing the voices, but I mean, it's like you were providing the voices for the characters in a lot of them. Was that by choice? Like, was that, or were you just like, were you and however other many people you had around? Was that just sort of like the only people you could get for that sort of thing?
Well, a big piece of it was convenience. And so that was the choice part of it. But I'm not a voice actor, nor do I play one on TV. Well, I did play one here and there, but it really was a bunch of people just wanting to, shout lines at the screen. And that's why it started that way. And also because I didn't have any money to make these, like from the start of things. And then when I did have the money, I was using it to have a salary, because
Yeah.
so I did work with voice actors and I did compensate them correctly. But it definitely the early ones were out of convenience and for fun. And
Right.
then sometimes it was for fun, and then sometimes I really couldn't do certain accents and I really needed voice actors to help me out.
What would you say that your favorite animation that you ever did was? Bunnies animation specifically.
One of my favorites is March of the Penguins. I
Mm,
really enjoy that documentary style of cartoons. Like those always cracked me up. So that one was really fun. I also liked Rocky because I like taking liberties with the movies, and I made a band at the end of all the pets in the pet shop, and that was really fun. So things like that, where I was able to do that in a big way, those are the ones that are my favorites.
yeah. Well, did you also, this is something I'm really curious about, did you or Stars, whoever was in charge of this aspect, did they actually seek out permission from the original copyright holders of the films you were parodying to have you make them, or was it more just sort of that, use and abuse of fair use or fair dealings or whatever that's become very commonplace nowadays?
Well, there were always ethics in place for me. Like I'm only always making these as an homage, first of all. Second of all, it also falls under the Parody Act. Um, but thirdly, as far as music licensing, like anything that I ever used that was a sound effect or music was always licensed. Um, and that is because of, legal responsibilities.
Okay, makes sense. And then lastly, I guess I would just have to say, with the, I mean, you can correct me on this, but with it's seeming like the bunny shorts have more or less fizzled out. What are you working on right now? Like, what are you up to these
Oh,
days?
is Well, as far as the fizzling out component, definitely the bunnies had a very long arc. Like 95 shorts is a lot of bunnies, and that was a highly enjoyable project. But you can imagine that after that many bunnies, a person tends to need to turn to other forms of entertainment. And so when the pandemic happened, it really sealed the deal on that I needed to work on something that wasn't animation because I didn't have time anymore because I'm a parent of a 12-year-old. She's 12 now. Um, and so I needed to pivot and work on something that allowed me the time, the compromised time that I now was faced with. And it seemed like a comic book or graphic novel was something I could work on in the cracks in between because there was a big time deficit. And it really hasn't, like there's still that time deficit weirdly, like to this day for me. So I've been working on a graphic novel called Worlds and Detective Agency, where newbie detective Avery Bear is trying to save a town from the deadly dragon, who also happens to be her first client. And I am on page 250 of the first draft, and I started it um, September 2020. And it's something I've been wanting to do my whole life, is like this type of long format cartoon or comic book story. Um, I've just never had an opportunity to really work on it. And it feels really exciting to be 250 pages into it. I have about another 50-ish pages to go before the draft is done. Uh, Hoping to finish it in, like March or April, and then edit it for a few months before I go on to the final draft. And right now for that, as far as like how I'm going to distribute it, I'm not really sure, but I'm just trying to tell the story as best I can and make it a really engaging story.
Cool, cool. And I guess real quick, just to wrap it up, it seemed like an obvious question, but I think it's worth asking. If you could have one piece of advice for anyone, not just in animation or illustration, but just in any artistic or creative field, especially if they're trying to like do it more or less independently and by themselves, kind of like you did, what would it be? It can be practical or it can be more like mystical. I don't know. Anything you want to say to people out there that are trying to do stuff like that.
Well, I think the mystical is going to feed the practical. So I think that ultimately it's entirely based on your own, you being the creator, like that you are going to be the one carrying your project. So if you believe in you and you believe in your project, uh, that's the one thing that's going to sustain you because you are going to come into contact with people who are going to not understand what you're doing. They're not going to understand you. Often you're going to be working in a vacuum of support or understanding. And therefore, you really need to have a file of like, when I feel shitty, I'm going to read this and I'm going to not look at my work like, is this good or does it suck? As Linda Berry, comics person extraordinaire, has said. It's really not about that. It's about how does it make you feel? How does making your work make you feel? And then everything else is a tool that can be acquired. You can build skills, you can acquire tools, but if you are beating yourself up at the end of the day, that is what you are going to have to struggle with. um, and it's hard not to because our culture sets us up for that, that Thomas the Tank Engine mentality, like, it's my fault. I'm causing confusion and delay. Um, so that is the first thing, is to be sure that you have fortified yourself, that you believe in what you're working on. And then everything else might be marginally easier.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. I think we can call it there. We have just enough time left. So thank you for taking the time out of your presumably busy schedule to have a little chat with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really great opportunity.
Very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, don't mention it. It's more. I guess that'll do it then. So, bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, and that'll do it for the interview. I hope you enjoyed my little talking to with Miss Jennifer Shiman. If you'd like to see what she's up to and, all of her collection of shorts and as well as the things that she's up to these days, I'm obviously going to link her website into the description of this video. Obviously, Jennifer, if you're watching this, again, huge thank you to allowing me to do this. This is a really great opportunity. I watched these shorts a lot when I was a little kid, so to be able to talk to the creator of something that, well, saying that it like made my childhood is a little bit of an overstatement, but still, it was a really amazing thing to do, especially just for this little YouTube channel. And speaking of this little YouTube channel, to everyone who stopped by and watched this, whether you're a long-time subscriber or just someone who, clicked on this thinking it would be interesting, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching or listening, since it was mostly an audio interview. But either way, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day, and until next time, see ya.